Okay, so in my research for the best movies post-pandemic, I am catching up on a lot of 2021 movies, but I'm also doing anything from the last 5 years. And one thing that keeps popping up is this movie, Worst Person in the World. And, I've got to be in the right headspace to be able to read the whole movie, right, for subtitles. But when I am, I really enjoy them. Anatomy of a Fall was one of my favorites of 2023, and I think that Decision to Leave is maybe one of my favorites ever. And I watched that very recently. But that's the thing, is like, this movie nothing gets taken away from me seeing the subtitles. I wasn't saying that. But this movie has a lot of things in it and a lot of things going for it. But I just didn't connect with it as much as I thought I would. And yet I identified with it. So there's kind of a dichotomy there that's fairly intriguing. And a lot of people say this is one of their favorites of the year from 2021. And I think that there's a lot to discuss here. I found that the chapters would drag. I felt like having 12 plus a prologue and epilogue. By the time I hit 8 to 9 to 10, I was just like, man, let's just get going. And there's this element of pacing just lost on me in those chapters. Now, sometimes I love chapter headings, like in Weapons earlier this year, but this time it just really dragged on me for some reason. The other part of this is the deeper question being asked here, and I'll get to that in a minute. Anders Ericsson Lee, best international performance I think I've seen. He is insane. He's so good. I cannot wait to watch what this Oslo trilogy is. I'm gonna watch the other two soon, and just to connect him and see him act some more, but also to kind of see what Trier's doing with this Oslo trilogy. But the amount of depth on display from him, and when he gets in the weeds in his interview, or when he's crying at the end because he's dying, it's just so powerful. So, all that to be said, the thing I came away from this movie was questioning what they meant by the title. Who is the worst person in the world? They mention it from the boyfriend, the second boyfriend, and like he says, he thinks he's the worst person in the world because of how he judges her. And there's this play on, but is she the worst person in the world because she's the subject? And what makes you the worst person in the world? And do we identify with that person? And if we do, does that make us the worst person in the world? There's a level of self-criticism, but also this lack of evidence for her being the worst person ever. She makes some bad decisions. She is somewhat selfish and definitely doesn't see others as much more than useful in her life, so to speak, right? They're kind of tools to an end. She has a place to live. They pay for stuff. She can just work at her bookstore and it's not a big deal. She can kind of float around to these different professions. But the evidence stacking up against her is really just more of a normal person's view of the world and how they can interact and take note of what they're supposed to do. She didn't have a purpose. She was just kind of floating by and trying to make do. And these other guys, one of them didn't really have much aspiration, but that didn't mean he didn't have a purpose. And then the other one was a cartoonist that was very successful, and that was great for him. And he found that purpose in that. And then when it was challenged in the Me Too movement, he crumbled, but then he died. It's kind of a tragic story, but I think overall, there's an element of self-reflection that I'm dealing with when it comes to being the worst person in the world, and whether or not I think that main character is the worst person in the world. I'd like to hear from other people and what they think of this film and why they've liked it, because there's not, like I've said, the evidence seems lacking that she is a terrible person. She's not a great person, but there's nothing, I feel like the worst person in the world starts to delve into things of pedophilia and murder and genocide and things of that nature, the darkest places of humanity. And what I think this movie might be standing up is a mirror for how we self-criticize, how we understand our surroundings and the people in our life, and where we draw the line on selfishness and compassion. Was she being nice to her dad when she finally cut him off, so he didn't feel like he had to be, her dad still? Was she being selfish because he wasn't treating her well? Where do we draw the line? Is cheating an actual underlying thing, or is it not? There's lots of questions at work here, and I think that really makes this movie intriguing. But I think that the runtime and its pacing kind of hurt it. Otherwise, it's beautiful. The acting's phenomenal, and there's quite a bit at play here musically. So by the end, you feel okay, there's some character development and it's intriguing in that regard. But I need to know what you guys think. Let me know down in the comments. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and thanks for watching.